Okay, we're going to get started today. We're recording this not because we need such a giant room, but this is the only room available that we can stream from. So, Carrie, if you're watching us out there, thanks for joining us. Kathy, I'm sure that you'll get this broadcast sometime when it works in your time zone, but thanks for hanging out with us. And I'm just going to share a few memories and thoughts and let you go. We've got a lot of history with Brian and Sylvia. That's for sure. Loved to be called Sarge, insisted on everybody calling him Sarge. That was his preferred nickname. Let me just read for you some words I wrote a little while back. Brian Sylvia, or Sarge as he preferred to be called, died on October 20th, 2023, at the age of 68 of natural causes. He was born April 7th, 1955 in Providence, Rhode Island, to Olive Diaz and Alexander Sylvia. He was raised in the Providence area, and he had one brother. All of his family preceded him in death, and at age 18 he joined the United States Marine Corps. His service took him to Vietnam, where he was a radio operator with the 1st Marine Division, FMF. Brian was injured and honorably discharged in 1973. He received the National Defense Service Medal and was a rifle expert in M16. Following his time in the Marine Corps, Brian became a commercial welder in Rhode Island, specializing in stainless steel fabrication. Brian enjoyed reading with particular interest anything military. He was also a huge Star Trek fan, and he loved the classic movies as well. He made his way to Montana in the late 1990s, first living in Missoula for approximately 8 months, then eventually making his way here to Libby in 2001. He never lost his heavy New England accent or his attitude. He was sure he was right about almost everything. And if you knew him, you didn't even have to ask. He would gladly volunteer that information. He freely shares his advice, whether it was solicited or not. And Brian had a lot of stories to tell. If you made it past the gruff exterior, however, Brian was very kind and caring. He considered Carrie Jacob of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, his daughter, and her children, Jaden and Austin, as his grandsons. Though they were not biologically his, he always considered himself as somebody who could fix things. He created many home remedies for all kinds of aches and ailments and shared them with others. He felt that fixing things was his contribution to the world. Brian left this world with many unfinished projects and unrealized dreams. He struggled to find his place at times in life. But he loved Montana and he loved Libby, and he considered Northwest Montana to be his second home. His stories will be remembered for many years to come. We say, rest in peace, Sarge. He died back in October, and it's been a crazy, busy winter here. But his life was very interesting because he was very, in some ways, quiet. Though if you knew him, he was not one to be visible all the time, but he always had something to say. As I shared with you, even in these words, Brian was an interesting character. He always told stories. He always had something. We had lunch together at least once a month for years and years and years. And I would hear every story about everything that he could possibly imagine. I'm not even sure he knew my wife's name, even though I've known him and he knew her for 20-some years. He always called her the boss. Make sure you say hi to the boss. That's why I was sure that he probably didn't know her name, because he forgot it. I told it to him multiple times. But I'm sure it just never registered because he was too busy telling me about his next story or his next memory or thought or idea that he had. Brian is going to be known here. Some of the people in the community know that he formed a militia. That militia was not to overthrow the government, to assist in times of emergency. And he had a plan, and he had it all laid out, and he spent literally hours and months of his life and even years of his life planning and organizing and designing an opportunity for people to protect our community from outside influence. What a lot of people don't know, if you knew him, you knew he was a bit of a conspiracy theorist, but he was very selective. And what was really funny is he didn't just believe every conspiracy out there. He was very selective, and only some he would get on board with. Other ones he would be like, oh, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, well, 80% of the theories you come up with are ridiculous. But he was committed to them wholeheartedly, and he put great thought and effort and research into them. He was a bit of a poet. Brian grew up in a broken home, and it showed. He was a broken guy. and he hurt a lot, and so that's how we met. He showed up at my office 22 years ago with a question about how God could allow a child to die, and I don't know the story behind it. He just said, help me wrap my brain around that, and that began a 22-year relationship. And we would talk about God, we would talk about the military, we would talk about his family, we would talk about whatever came to mind, and he was a broken person, had a lot of hurt in his life. There were people that brought incredible joy to him. Carrie, he absolutely loved you and your sons. I know that he's kind of weird, and he adopted you whether you wanted him to or not, but every time you would make contact, he would definitely let me know. I heard from Carrie, or I heard from the boys, or I sent them a gift. And just know that he loved you as if you were his own daughter. Not that he hadn't told you that 1,000 times, but he cared very deeply about you and your sons, and he only wished the best for you and for them. One of Brian's highlights of his life was serving in the Marine Corps. In fact, he wanted to serve a lot longer than he was allowed to. He was injured in Vietnam on his tour, but the Marine Corps mattered most to Brian. He loved it. He loved everything about it. He wanted to make a career out of it, and because of his injury, he was not allowed to. But the Marines are an interesting bunch. I read this quote about Marines, and I think it's so true, particularly in Brian's case. This is from the Rear Admiral R. Stark, who is of the United States Navy, a Rear Admiral. And he says this: Marines I see as two breeds, Rottweilers or Dobermans. Because Marines come in two varieties, big and mean or skinny and mean. They're aggressive on the attack and tenacious on defense. They've got really short hair, and they're always going for the throat. And I thought, if you knew Brian, he always kind of kept his hair short. He would do his own haircuts, and you could tell that he was doing his own haircut because he would miss spots here and there. Missed a spot, you got to go back and check it. But he always gave himself his own haircut, always kept a buzz cut, and always, if you listen to him talk, he was always going to protect and to serve. There's a Marine prayer that I found that I thought would fit, and I know Brian loved the Marine Corps and he loved God, even though he had the most unusual ways of demonstrating that. The Marine prayer goes like this: Almighty Father, whose command is over all, and whose love never fails, make me aware of thy presence and obedient to thy will. Keep me true to my best self, guarding me against dishonesty in purpose and deed, and helping me to live so that I can face my fellow Marines, my loved ones, and thee without shame or fear. Protect my family. Give me the will to do the work of a Marine and to accept my share of the responsibilities with vigor and enthusiasm. Grant me the courage to be proficient in my daily performance. Keep me loyal and faithful to my superiors and to the duties of my country and the Marine Corps have entrusted to me. Make me considerate of those who committed to my leadership. Help me to wear my uniform with dignity, and help it remind me daily of the traditions which I must uphold. For if I am inclined to doubt, steady my faith. If I am tempted, make me strong to resist. And if I should miss the mark, give me courage to try again. Guide me with the light of truth, and grant me wisdom by which I may understand the answer to my prayer. Amen. Sarge was an interesting character, as I've already shared. He had 1,000 stories. And he spoke as someone who wanted to be recognized for the abilities that he had. And again, I only have my relationship with him, which ran very deep, but he had a lot going on in his brain. He always felt the world was against him, and there were very few people he felt were on his side. And so that put him at a disadvantage when it came to relationships. They were kind of weird. He was definitely an unusual one. If you knew him, you'd hear him cuss at the drop of a hat, and you'd hear him brag about his service in the Marine Corps every time. And you would hear him talk about some kind of military emphasis or something he'd read or something he'd learned, and he could quote more statistics about military equipment than anybody I've ever met. And he did, and I heard them all. But he also, what most people don't know about Brian is he did have faith. And he and I spent long days and conversations talking about God. Because he always said this. He said, I don't think there's a God. I know. He said, I don't have faith. I know that there is a God. And he cared deeply about Brian. And somewhere in all of his experiences, he had an encounter with a God who he found that loved him very deeply and unconditionally. Because of that, we had many long conversations about God. The scripture I thought of when I thought of Brian is found in Matthew chapter 12, verse 20. And it says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he has brought justice through victory. And that passage was written about Jesus. And it was speaking about Jesus, who loved and always had room for broken people. Brian was broken. We all know that. He had heartache and heartbreak, felt like the rejection of a mother who didn't love him, felt all of the other things of a Marine Corps that couldn't continue to keep him because he was injured. He found himself at odds with many. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, there was faith. He said, I don't have faith, Pastor. I know there is a God, and I know he cares. And in all of that, he never once came to church, called me pastor with his heavy New England accent. Hey, pastor, when we having lunch? And I'd get a text, or not a text, but an email or a phone call finding out when the next time was we were to meet. Called me pastor, convinced that I was his pastor, and more than likely I was. Never once came to church. He was not your traditional churchgoer. He was just an interesting character who needed love. He was a funny guy some of the time. He was pretty serious most of the time in our conversations. I know he loved to joke and crack jokes that he thought were just hilariously funny. The rest of us weren't quite so sure. He loved watching classic movies, which was very interesting. And we would get into some big, long discussion about some movie that was made in the 60s and how that its profound impact had on the world today. I thought, wow, buddy. You've got a creative mind and a creative imagination. Brian always had dreams of being a success. He hoped for the best. He had some incredible ideas that I think if they ever came to be, some of them would actually be very effective and work well. He ran out of life before he ran out of opportunity. And he had all kinds of opportunities to find himself in various ways. He was very reserved in many ways. He sat in his house most of the time. He didn't get out much, especially the last couple of years. His health failed him. He couldn't walk. He was just convinced he was going to get back out and start running again any day, and he couldn't hardly make it across the floor for a little while. So we brought him groceries and did all the things that needed to be done. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, he did love deeply. He cared deeply. Kathy, if you were watching this in Costa Rica, he admired you and appreciated your friendship more than anything you could imagine. And you were a life giver to him. You were an encourager, even in all of his crazy ideas and all of the wonderful things that he had in mind. You were an encourager, so thank you for caring about a guy on the other side of the world whom you met online. Well, there's a whole bunch of memories we can share. One of those memories my wife has, when Sarge was in transition between the last house he was at, or the last apartment he was in, and the current one, he acquired another Jeep. He had an old Jeep that you see in the pictures here, and he had that Jeep forever, and then somewhere along the way he acquired another Jeep. And he didn't have room at his old house, and he didn't have room at his new house yet because he hadn't all. So he said, "Can I park this at your house?" And I reluctantly said yes, because I know how this is going to end. I can see it already. But he kept his new Jeep there, and one day he came over and he said, "I'm going to come and do the headlight clean thing, so make the headlights better on my vehicle." It was also my son was graduating from high school. This was about 7 years ago. He was graduating from high school, and my wife's brother, who'd only been to Montana one time in his life, was coming to visit. And he hadn't arrived yet, but we were trying to get everything ready for her brother's arrival. And here comes Sarge, getting ready to clean his headlights. And it didn't matter whatever else was going on. That was his goal for the day. And somewhere along the way, he wasn't known to be the most clean person in the world. I don't know if he never washed his clothes for reasons. I just know his clothes were definitely shown signs of great wear. and a lot of dirt. And somewhere along the way, he managed to rip the back of his pants from just about the belt loop down below, of course, his cheeks. And he showed up, and my wife was worried that her brother was on the way and he was going to pull in. And Sarge is standing in our front yard, cleaning his headlights. And as he bends over, of course, the whole world gets to enjoy the view of his backside. Pardon? And, of course, he was going commando because what good soldier wears underwear? And so that was probably the biggest memory my wife has shared about Sarge, even though we have 100 other stories. And it didn't even bother him. That was the thing. It didn't even occur to him that that would be a problem. And so we laugh, and sometimes we laughed with him, and sometimes we laughed at him. But he was just a unique individual. He loved the military. He loved his country very deeply. He cared deeply about others. If you made it past the gruff exterior, he was a man who loved deeply. And so for that, I am privileged that he cared about me the way he did. Sometimes it was greatly unwanted, and sometimes it created its own set of headaches and heartaches. But he was a man who loved deeply. And if you were one of the recipients of that, you knew that. He was a giver, even though he had nothing, even though financially he didn't manage his affairs terribly well. He always thought he needed to get something. And if I helped him in any way, shape, or form, he tried to pay me back. And he would buy me stuff offline that cost him $1 and hand it to me, just convinced I needed this for my next camping trip or my next outing. But it wasn't about the things. It was about the intent of his heart. And he would share that as well. He appreciated others around him. I want to just end today with playing a song. He always loved the bagpipes. He always loved the military. And so we're going to play this as our close today, the song Amazing Grace. And it was one of his favorites because he really did believe in a God who loved and a God who cared. And so we end with this, and we appreciate each of you who jumped online, watch us, and of course for those of you who are here as well. Go ahead. take one moment and say thank you, Amanda, for taking care of his affairs and being such a kind heart. Thank you guys for watching, and you are in our thoughts and prayers. As we lay him to rest, he will be, his ashes, he requested his ashes be spread up on 5 miles, so sometime when the weather's a little more cooperative, I'll be taking him there for his final resting place. And so thank you again for somehow affecting that man's life as he has also affected ours. God bless you.